Okay, so welcome to the Secrets of the Shoulder. We want to talk to you today about what the big problem that we find and we see with the members and also in cricket in general. 2, we're going to assess it. And then 3, we're going to correct it. So by the end of this sort of sequence, you're going to be able to understand, where you are within that spectrum, how to understand, how to fix it, and where we're going to go from there. So let's take the challenge that we have is that nothing gets injured alone and nothing repairs on its own as well. So let me go into a little bit more detail. Every single part of the human body has a job description, something that it should do. You either have joints that are mobile or stable by origin. The issue occurs when either one of those joints are not mobile enough or not stable enough. Now, this is the software, this is the computer system. These are all the hardware, these are the parts. So you have to have a good understanding about the parts and then understand how the brain uses the parts, which is motor control. Now, in our experience from a cricketing point of view, is that unfortunately our environments shape the positions of the skeleton. So we live in straight lines, drive our cars, eat our food, everything is in front of us. We then get some crappy gym session or gym program that has all push and pull. And then we try and play a dynamic sport like cricket where we turn sideways, rotate through all different planes of motion, and then deliver a ball. And whether you're batting or bowling, you have more challenges on the system. So we have to understand how to stay ahead of problems and also how to correct them, because most of our life is going to feed us into patterns that are going to destroy our athleticism. So we're going to talk to you today about the shoulder, and then the shoulder itself, different sections. So you have the scapula that sits on the rib cage. The scapula is designed to be stable. That's the part that clings onto the rib cage and needs to move in different planes of motion to make sure that the actual joint itself, which is the glenohumeral joint, has full range. So that the shoulder joint, the actual axis of the shoulder, should be able to move. Yeah, it is the largest range of motion behind the hips within the human body. It needs to be able to move all over the place, but it needs to be able to be stable enough to have that. Now, the problem that we have is if we go after the shoulder in complete isolation, i.e. I've got shoulder pain, and we don't check or look at anything else positionally, then we're going to be chasing symptoms. We're going to be honing in on something that might be a little bit of a impingement. It could be a rotator cuff issue, it could be a problem with the shoulder, but it could be caused by anything else. So nothing gets injured alone and nothing heals alone. That's why we have to have an understanding of the pelvis, the relationship with the rib cage, because fundamentally those parts all have a direct correlation to function at the shoulder itself. Now, again, from our point of view, life starts with the pelvis because it dictates the position of the rib cage. Most of us are predisposed to be a little bit tilted forward, so then we go into lumbar extension. We end up having that shoulder that's internally rotated. So now we're in a position where the tissues are very short and tight in the front. So expressing overhead elevation or getting overhead without compensation becomes a bit of a nightmare. And you know from a release point, from bowling, even from throwing, what we have is a system that's now not able to get into these positions without compensation, now biasing poor biomechanics, which over time is going to lead to pain or symptoms or injury. So we have to be able to have an understanding that that shoulder is not only reliant on a rib cage that moves very nice and free like a spring, but it's also reliant on it being stacked above the pelvis. The pelvis will have a direct implication on the shoulder function if we can't deal with that. In the same way that the foot does as well, and our center of mass. So within this kind of process, what we're going to go through is going to talk to you a little bit about how we assess the shoulder, how we actually not only assess it, but how we know how to correct it, and more importantly, how to stay on top of it. Because the last thing I want to leave you with after many years of the team doing this is we now know, due to something called the fascial system, which is for another time, that there is a sling, posterior sling, that's connecting the opposing hip and shoulder together. Whenever I hear shoulder pain, shoulder problems, I see it as a precursor to another bigger problem, which is coming at the lumbar spine. So anecdotally, I actually look at this as an early warning sign, a shoulder flare-up for a potential back injury that could be just around the corner. So it's crucial that we stay on top of this. Okay, so we've got Akash here with us today. Akash has been dealing with some shoulder issues over the last few months, and we're going to try and understand a little bit about what is the cause. Remember, you don't just look at the site of pain and you don't just change symptoms. So we're going to be looking at all different body parts. The issue that you have though, is like I said in the introduction, is the pelvis has a direct correlation to the position of the rib cage. And as we'll talk a bit more detail around this further down the line, how you manage your center of mass through the floor, your center of gravity also has a direct correlation on where the rib cage and the pelvis are. So if I turn Akash sideways to the camera, just exaggerate this. If you put all your weight into the front of the foot, lean forward and stay there, what do you have to do through your lumbar spine to look up? Yeah, you have to go into extension, exaggerated. But what happens here now is Akash will do everything to keep his eye line level. He can't spend his life looking down at the floor based on the fact his center of mass is coming through here, the front of the foot. So sometimes you can't just go fixing something here that could be a problem without actually looking at what is the underlying cause of the problem positionally. And sometimes a simple weight shift back towards the heels, go again, there you go, just actually is your low-hanging fruit for allowing the body to open up. So the very first thing we're going to do, we're going to run through different assessments so you can do this on yourself. So, Akash, if you can face away from the camera and just make a fist with your hands. All I want you to do in a second is take one arm over the top and get them as close as you possibly can, and one arm up your back. There you go. Okay, so that's the right arm over the top, and you're going to measure the difference here, and now we're going to go the other side as well. On the left hand. Okay, so you can see we want to try and get within one palm or a palm and hand, but I'm looking more for symmetry than I'm looking more for getting too close together. Now to get into this position, if you come back to the beginning, the first thing we're doing with the arm over the top is we are now externally rotating. To externally rotate, we need to have enough extension through the rib cage, through the thoracic, so to get that there. Now to internally rotate the other arm, we need to still be able to extend through that rib cage area. So we're checking each joint, external, internal. We're also checking the rib cage. Can I actually extend through that rib cage? That's the first test. Okay, we need to now have a little bit more of a deeper dive into the rib cage and the interplay between the rib cage, the scapula and the shoulder joint itself. But I want to have a look at rotation. The easiest way to improve shoulder mobility is through actually increasing thoracic rotation. Much more than you see in the gym where people are trying to get overhead, so they're trying to max out more extension. So rotation of the thoracic spine actually improves overall mobility at the top half. But we need to have a look, like I said at the beginning, because we know the pelvis has a direct relationship between the rib cage, we need to get Akash into a position where we're actually off his feet, exposing that position. So Akash, if you can drop down into a tall kneeling position, so knees out wide, shuffle the knees out a little bit more, and feet together at the back. Perfect. So what this is doing now, and some of you might find this actually a little bit challenging, almost like you want to fall forward, but we're forcing the pelvis to be as level as possible because we're not allowing gravity in our center of mass and our feet to have a direct correlation between where our pelvis sits. So a tall kneeling position exposes or gets us in the best position to be able to have a level pelvis and a rib cage stacked above it. Now from here, okay, so if you could just put that behind your neck with two hands on, we'll look at rotation. So what I'd like to see, and again, what we're looking for when you do this, it's not so much about having huge range of motion both sides. If you're going to be tight and stiff, I'd rather you be tight and stiff equally on both sides of the body. Imagine the front wheels of your car when you're driving. If one wheel, the tracking is out by 20 degrees and you're driving, well, that's going to end up in the garage over a period of the next 6 weeks. So we want to make sure there's reasonable symmetry. Now in a perfect world, Akash would be able to rotate roughly between 35 and 40 degrees equally bilaterally on both sides. So to do this first, if you could, Akash, you can go this way, turn as far as you can. Okay, great. Now that, for me, is a good 45, possibly more. So it shows there's good rotation. Now come back to the middle, and then let's go to the left-hand side now. And then rotate round. Okay, excellent. Come back to the beginning. Okay, let's just go through one more time, nice and slowly. Good. Excellent. And then back to the left-hand side. Okay, good, jump up. So, tall kneeling thoracic rotation, 35 to 40 degrees, but we're really looking for as much symmetry. If in doubt and you can't measure it, ask yourself, ask the person that you're doing this, do you feel roughly symmetrical on both sides of the body? So when I relate that to the bowling action, because we are constantly talking about how we get more hip shoulder separation, it's the ability to keep the rib cage of your right arm bowler rotated to the right behind us whilst pivoting the hips in a disassociation pattern. Now, it's no good just having the ability to rotate to the right, because if I can't rotate back to the left, so for a right-handed bowler on the left-hand side of the body, we're looking at external rotation and flexion, and the hip capsule will externally rotate. If you can't keep moving, force has to go somewhere, and we end up going into this position here as opposed to rotating, folding forward. So that's why it's really important that both sides of the rib cage is checked. And unfortunately, with these unilateral single-sided sports, whether we play golf or whether we bat, we often find that right rotation is much bigger than left rotation. Okay, so I've asked Akash to see if he can move his arm up behind his back. Now, if I could lift that arm up and move it further, then we know that he has more range of motion, he can't access it, so it's more of a software problem. But I know I can feel how restricted he is, even if I try and move that. So if you drop the arm down, and let's go to the left-hand side of the body. Okay, so it's a little bit more range of motion. You can move the hand up further, a little bit less restriction. I'm going to see if I can... Okay, it's definitely on the left-hand side of the body, there's less tightness, there's less restriction. So right now, when I'm looking at Akash, I can see the rib cage is moving reasonably well, it's rotating. But this right shoulder is extremely restricted, or more restricted to the left-hand side, which that right shoulder correlates to this left hip. Remember that cross-sling pattern. That's why we see shoulders relate to hip and back pain, and you've got to treat everything. You can't just go after one part of the body. Okay, so we've gone through the original assessment. Like I said before, is we know that Akash can rotate nicely. There's no issue there. We know this right shoulder, when we actually go into internal, is more restricted. I actually see at the moment that what we've got, or what we're dealing with, is a shoulder capsule tissue stroke mobility dysfunction, i.e. we just need to get this right shoulder free and moving, which correlates directly across to the left hip as well. You have to understand a little bit back down to basic human hardwiring. The first joint in the human body that was loaded wasn't the hips and the pelvis, it was the shoulder. And it happened when we were all probably about 6 to 9 months old. We all got head and neck control first, and then we started to prop ourselves up on our forearms. We actually loaded the shoulder, and it was that loading motion, which is effectively training the rotator cuff, which is a timing muscle. It's not a how do I get my rotator cuff stronger. Good example would be you see a 6-year-old on the beach and dad's swinging him into the sea over the waves. That shoulder doesn't come out of joint. We're really very good at keeping the shoulder nice and solid. The problem though that we have is we are training the shoulder now. You go to a standard physiotherapist that might give you some banded external rotations, and then we're literally just pushing and pulling on the shoulder. Whereas what it actually likes is the ability to resist force in a loaded pattern to wake the rotator cuff up, which gives you better joint alignment. Okay, so let's work through some of the basics. So we're going to do 4 different corrective drills. The first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be getting more air into the rib cage. We want to get the body and the rib cage really nice and expanded. So we're going to do a breathing positional drill first. Okay, some of the quickest wins or low-hanging fruit to any form of mobilization is air. The more air we can get in through the abdomen into the diaphragm to open up the rib cage, push down the pelvic floor. Air itself is the number 1 low-hanging fruit. And we're going to do a positional breathing drill here with Akash now. Now, you're going to set yourself up with your heels on a bench and you're going to get 90 degrees. Now, the reason this is important, remember, like I said at the start, the pelvis has a direct correlation between the rib cage and the shoulder joint as well. So we're attacking all three here. So if you can just put your right arm over your head and lay it on the floor. We only do this with the right arm above the head because the right side of the diaphragm is actually bigger. We can get more air into the right side. And ironically, for a lot of human beings who play cricket right side dominant, we struggle to get air into the right hand side of the body. Left hand side's not too bad. But when you think about all of the issues, when you think about side strains, you think about hip issues, back issues, quite often we have some issues that start because we can't get air into the right hand side of the body. The next thing Akash is going to do is he's just going to prop his tailbone up by a couple of inches off the ground. That gets some hamstring activation, which is now literally pulling on the pelvis, which is fantastic. Now from here, Akash is going to do a couple of big breaths. He's going to fill his abdomen in first, and then he's going to blow the balloon up. So if you could go for the 2 reps. Good. All in the abdomen, and then blow the balloon. Cool. And again, one more, abdomen full of air. Excellent. And then hold the balloon and just reset. So really, really important here that we're trying to move air into the right hand cavity of the body. Okay, so we've got some air into the system, into the rib cage. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take Akash down to a tall kneeling position. We do this because we said at the beginning, it forces the pelvis to be level with the rib cage stacked above. We want to maintain that relationship between pelvis and rib cage through all of our corrective work. So if you wouldn't mind just dropping on down. Perfect. So you can grab the pole. Now, this again, we're going to be using air to improve range of motion. So the first thing Akash is going to do in a second, he's going to rotate towards me as far as he possibly can. Now when he goes as far as he can, I want him to, when he's hit that mark, back off it an inch, cycle a big, big nasal breath in the abdomen, let the air out, and then we're going to go into a side bend, and we're going to hold the side bend for another breath. Okay, so if you can then rotate round to me. Excellent. Back off it an inch. Good. Cycle a big breath. Air out. Side bend. Stay down there. Big air in. Air out. Stay down there for one more breath. I'm going to cycle 2 breaths in this position. Come back up. And now move more. You'll get more range. Okay, so can you see he's increased his range of motion by a good sort of 10-15 degrees just through breath, rotation, and a side bend. Excellent. Okay, so we've got some air into the body. We've increased some rotation. Now back to the very first part, how we want to talk about how the rotator cuff actually resists. It's a stabilizer based on timing. So we need to actually start to load the joint in a nice kind of static position. Now, we've put Akash in like a 90-90 hip position because again, we want to tie in some range of motion and improve the position of the pelvis and the rib cage. So all Akash is going to do here, he's going to sit up nice and tall. He's going to rotate over to the right with straight arms. Now before he moves, we're going to cycle a breath through the nose and then all the air out, and he's going to prop up off that right hip by about 2 inches. So up you go. Excellent. Hold it there for a breath. Okay. And then back down. Reset, and let's go again. So what we're doing now, most of the force is underneath that right shoulder and left shoulder as well. We're moving air and we're just popping up into a position where the pelvis is off the floor by a couple of inches. So we're just getting some reactive kind of neuromuscular tension through the shoulder joint itself. We're getting some alignment benefits, and we're also keeping the interplay between now the pelvis and the rib cage, and we're challenging rotation. So this would be a particular hip shoulder separation drill that we would like to see that you could achieve, because again, there are no straight lines in the bowling action at all. And we must remember that. So we are constantly, with the players that we work with, we're constantly having to undo the daily environment of where people spend the majority of their time, whether that's sat at a desk or traveling to an away trip. We have to get out of the sagittal plane and we have to maintain that. Otherwise, it's going to underpin everything we're trying to achieve on the park. Okay, so to finish off, we've moved some air into the body. We have the rib cage moving. We've got some rotation in play. We've woken up, if you like, in a static position, the rotator cuff and the shoulder complex. Now we need to go to the computer system and throw some actual dynamic movement into play while still loading the shoulder. Now, one of the things I do love is putting some bear crawls into play, but we don't put a bear crawl in to a shoulder that doesn't move correctly and a rib cage that doesn't move freely. Comes as the last segment. So, Akash, if you could just jump down into that 90-degree setup position, hands directly under your shoulders, very small movements, off you go. Literally tiny movements. Good. Good. Sometimes this is quite a humbling movement. Sometimes it's something that's extremely difficult for people to actually grasp. But now what we're doing is we're getting some dynamic movement into the shoulder. We're forcing the shoulder to stabilize whilst controlling movement. We're now bringing in the entire anterior core, the relationship between the pelvis. Can we move our pelvis and hips, our hips and shoulders in unison? Do we have that level of control and stabilization? Sometimes, like I say, a bear crawl downhill, uphill, great correctives, but don't throw a bear crawl on a shoulder that's actually got some limitations, because you're just going to be compounding it as well. Okay, so just to wrap up this short series on the shoulder, hopefully the takeaway points are, if you are somebody with shoulder limitations or shoulder restriction or shoulder pain, if you see a physiotherapist and they're just treating the shoulder, run. Shoulders, in my experience, especially in a cricketing capacity, they don't just get injured on their own. They don't just flare up. Yes, if you go for a diving catch on a hard outfield and you hit the ground with your shoulder, you know why it's bruised, you know what the cause is. But if you suddenly throw a ball, you wake up the next morning and there's something wrong with the shoulder, there is something else causing it. That's the really important side of it. Now we've summarized why the rib cage is key and the relationship between pelvis and rib cage. These two, just by getting a better pelvis to rib cage relationship, quite often you'll find that basic shoulder impingements will start to improve and they will start to clear up. Most of us have a shoulder that's just rotated too far inward. A really, really easy test you can do for this as well is just stand up normally. If your thumbs are pointed inward, chances are you've got a shoulder that's internally rotated. Ideally, the shoulder sits down and back and the thumbs are pointing backwards. Again, this is why I don't like training where a shoulder's in that position and now we're desperate to pick up a straight bar, or we're trying to do chins and pull-ups on two cranky shoulders. Or a kettlebell swing when we're already in internal rotation. Address the position of the hardware first so you can get better biomechanics. Now we've got a position where we understand why the pelvis is so important. And if I turn Bones sideways on, if Bones' center of mass is so far forward, he's going to go into a lumbar extension just to live. Now, another part of this as well is sometimes just being able to shift your center of mass slightly backwards gives you a chance to reorientate the pelvis and let the rib cage drop above it. But it's very, very important you accept one vital thing, is that, you know, you could have a week in bed being ill. You could have 2 long car journeys. The position of Bones here is fluid. It changes based on where you spend most of your time. You have to have simple ways to check in with your body and simple ways to fix range of motion and make sure you keep a smile on your face.